Grace Donnelly wasn't famous, not the kind of woman who turned heads or trended online. She was the kind you noticed only after she'd already made your day better. At 35, she managed the Mason Mug Cafe, a humble brick-front shop tucked beside a laundromat, and across from the county courthouse in downtown Mason, Georgia. The floors creaked, the menu was simple, and the coffee came in thick ceramic mugs that remembered the warmth of a hand. But it wasn't the coffee that kept people coming back. It was Grace. Every Wednesday morning, she hosted Heroes Hour. It wasn't advertised on flyers or mentioned in fancy social posts. It was just a quiet, weekly moment that had grown from one small promise she made to herself after her husband. Staff Sergeant Michael Donnelly was killed in Action 6. Years earlier, in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, a promise to hold space for those who returned. That morning, sunlight crept gently over the storefronts. The American flag outside the Mason mug stirred in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon muffins and strong dark roast. Grace stood behind the counter, apron already dusted in flour, hair pinned back in a loose bun. She moved with practiced calm, the kind you only gain by carrying your own heartbreak. Long enough to make room for someone else's, Ray McMillan arrived just before 9. Late 50s, broad-shouldered but tired around the eyes. He was quiet. Always had been. A former Marine recon who never talked about his tours but never missed a Wednesday. At his side was Shadow, a German Shepherd Lab mix with steady eyes, and a bright red vest that read Service Dog, Do Not Pet. Grace didn't need to ask questions. She never did. She nodded as he entered, already pouring the coffee into the blue-rimmed mug she set aside just for him. Table by the windows. "Open?" she said, offering the smallest smile. Ray murmured thanks, and Shadow padded silently beside him, settling beneath the table like he'd always belonged. But the moment was short-lived. The door swung open again, this time with the energy of someone trying too hard to be important. Tall man in a perfectly pressed navy blazer and clipboard walked in like he owned the air. His name tag read Logan Prescott, State Health Inspector. He didn't smile, didn't greet anyone. He just nodded sharply and started his inspection. Grace approached him politely, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. "Routine inspection," he replied, without looking at her. He moved through the cafe like a storm wrapped in silence, checking shelves, lifting lids, running fingers over sink edges, and then he stopped mid-step. He had seen Shadow. His voice echoed too loudly in the cozy space. "That animal," he barked, pointing, "is in violation of state health code. No animals permitted where food is served." The cafe went still. Forks paused midway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Grace stepped from behind the counter, keeping her voice even. "He's a registered service animal, ADA permits. Him here." Prescott's eyes narrowed. "I don't care what vest he's wearing. Animals carry allergens, hair, dander, saliva. If you don't remove that dog, I'll have to shut this cafe down." Ray didn't flinch, but his hand tightened around his coffee mug. Shadow, as trained, didn't react, only looked up at his human with calm readiness. Grace knew the room was listening, knew every word that followed would echo. She also knew what she stood to lose. "I won't ask a veteran to leave," she said quietly, "and I won't ask his service dog to leave either. You're welcome to file your report, but you'll be filing it knowing you tried to humiliate a Marine in a place meant for his peace." A murmur swept the room, a quiet dam right from the back. Someone clapped once, awkwardly, then stopped. Before anything else could be said, another figure entered the doorway. Deborah Lyell, regional manager for the cafe's corporate parent, had arrived early for her monthly check-in, just in time to witness the entire scene. Her heels clicked like punctuation on the tile. "Grace Donnelly," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "You've just violated a direct compliance policy in front of a state inspector. Effective immediately, you're terminated." Gasps followed. A spoon fell to the floor. Ray looked up in disbelief. Prescott just scribbled something on his clipboard. Grace didn't plead, didn't argue. She simply looked around the cafe at Ray, at Shadow, at the chalkboard that read Heroes Hour, free coffee for vets. She untied her apron, hands, trembling only slightly, folded it, and set it on the counter to Lena. "The young barista near the espresso machine," she whispered. "Make sure Ray gets his refill." And she walked out into the golden morning light, alone. No fanfare, no applause. Just the hush of a place that had lost something more than a manager. It had lost its heart. But what Grace didn't know, what no one in that cafe yet knew, was that a teenage girl sitting near the back had recorded the whole thing on her phone. Her mother was a military spouse. Her grandfather, a Vietnam vet. She knew what she was seeing. She uploaded the clip before her latte had gone cold. By 9:42 a.m., it had reached a veterans advocacy group online. By 10:15, it was on the screen, inside a corner office at Fort Granger. And by 10:45, the sound of tires on asphalt would shake the town. At exactly 10:47 a.m., the hum began, faint at first, like distant thunder rolling low across the Georgia hills. In the cafe, spoons paused over plates, phones lifted toward the window. Then the rumble grew louder, steadier, more deliberate. From Marine Humvees, Matt Green, spotless, unmistakable, turned onto Main Street like a scene from another world. Tires chewed the pavement with a rhythm too perfect to be random. They moved with precision, stopping directly in front of the Mason Mug Cafe. No sirens, no words, just quiet force. From the first Humvee, the driver's door opened and out stepped Colonel Richard Gaines. He was a towering presence in full Marine Corps dress blues. Ribbons lined his chest like a museum of service, white gloves in one hand, silver star on his collar. Eyes like Stillwater.com, but unreadable. And behind him, 24 Marines followed. Formation perfect, silent, standing at attention on the sidewalk, like they were guarding something sacred. Inside the cafe, no one moved. Logan Prescott, clipboard still in hand, had gone pale. He stood near the pastry case like he wanted to dissolve into it. Deborah Lyall, the corporate regional manager, stepped backward, stumbling into a chair. Lena, the barista, stood frozen behind the counter. Her fingers trembled around the edge of a coffee cup. She was halfway through pouring. She looked at Ray, whose hands were steady again. Shadow lay under his chair, alert but relaxed, as if he, too, understood what was unfolding. Then the cafe door opened, and Colonel Gaines stepped inside. His boots struck the floor with a slow, echoing cadence. Each step a statement. He stopped dead center in the room and scanned it once, not in search of confrontation, but to assess where the damage had been done. His gaze met Lena's. She swallowed hard. "Grace isn't here," she whispered. She was fired for standing up for Mr. McMillan and Shadow. The colonel's jaw tensed. He turned to Ray, whose back had straightened the moment the Marines arrived. Their eyes met two veterans, no ranks between them, only the recognition of service that could never be measured in medals. Ray stood slowly and nodded. The colonel returned the nod, and then, without a word, lifted his hand in a crisp, precise salute. The cafe remained in stunned silence. I didn't know," Prescott finally stammered, his voice cracking. "I was just following." Colonel Gaines turned toward him. Not angrily, not loudly, just firmly. "You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic dignity." Prescott dropped his clipboard. "Literally." Then Gaines faced Deborah Lyall. She was already shaking her head. "Colonel, this was a corporate compliance. You made your decision," he said, cutting her off with a calm finality that could split steel. "Now we'll make ours." He raised one gloved hand and pointed toward the front door. Two Marines stepped inside. One walked behind the counter and removed the corporate branded logo from the wall, a sleek printed vinyl piece bearing the parent company's name. They folded it like a flag. The other Marine reached into a case and pulled out a new chalkboard. Sin, it was hand-painted, simple, bold white lettering on black slate. "Welcome to Grace's house, where honor is served daily." A murmur rippled through the room. One person clapped, then another. The whole cafe was on its feet, not cheering, but standing the way one stands in church or at a memorial. When words are no longer enough, Deborah tried again, her voice brittle now. "You can't just rename Colonel Gaines." Didn't even look at her instead. He walked back outside and placed a call. Moments later, Lena's phone buzzed. She blinked and glanced down. "It's a message," she said aloud, "from Fort Granger. Official account." She paused, then read it aloud, requesting Grace Donnelly to report to Bass. Headquarters today at 1500 hours, Ray exhaled slowly, the lines on his face relaxing for the first time since sunrise. Shadow stood, his tail wagging once. Back at her house, Grace sat in her truck, the keys in the ignition but unmoved. She'd been there for 20 minutes, hands resting in her lap, her apron still folded on the passenger seat. She hadn't cried, not when she was fired, not when she walked out. But now, alone, with silence pressing in, she felt her chest tighten, not with grief, but with something that felt like disbelief. She stared at the phone in her lap. The message from Fort Granger was still open, an official request, signed by Colonel Gaines himself. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew what it felt like. It felt like something wasn't over. She turned the ignition and pulled out of the driveway. Following the familiar route she hadn't taken in years, the road that led past the gas station, through the town square, and up to the gates of Fort Granger. She'd driven this road with Michael, delivered muffins and coffee for base briefings, dropped off care packages, held his hand at the same checkpoint she now approached alone. The guard at the gate didn't stop her this time. He just nodded. The base looked the same, clean streets, sharp corners, flags flapping in rhythmic salute. But Grace felt different. Now, not a widow bringing baked goods, not a cafe manager delivering community. She wasn't sure what she was until she walked through the doors of headquarters. Colonel Gaines stood waiting. This time, he wasn't in dress blues. He wore a khaki uniform with rolled sleeves and a calm stillness that didn't need volume to command respect. "Grace," he said, offering his hand, "thank you for coming. Here, let me show you something." He led her through a corridor lined with old photos, men and women in fatigues, black and white images of long-retired heroes. They stopped in front of a door labeled Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative. Inside was a room still under construction, folding chairs stacked in corners, a few whiteboards along the walls, mats and therapy kits. A woman arranged coffee mugs near a new machine. "This is a pilot program," Gaines explained. "We've been trying to get it off the ground for 2 years. Vets. Not from paperwork, from inside." Grace folded her arms. "I'm not a therapist. I don't have a degree." "No," he said, "but you built a place where men and women came to heal, not to be fixed, to feel seen. You did more with coffee and kindness than most programs do with 6-figure budgets." From the back of the room, a voice called out, "Is that her?" A young woman stepped forward, early 20s, long sleeves covering burn scars along her arms. A golden retriever puppy walked beside her, its vest marked in training. "I'm Tiffany," the girl said quietly. "I saw the video. I haven't been to a coffee shop since I got back, but I think I could sit in one you run." Grace blinked. Her throat tightened. Colonel Gaines gave her a moment. Then he said, "We'd like to offer you a position, not a figurehead, not a poster name. Director of this center." Grace's breath caught. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack," he said. "You'd run it, shape it, build the culture. You already know what works." She looked at Tiffany, at the puppy, at the space that wasn't yet whole, but could be. "I'll do it," she said softly. Colonel Gaines nodded. "Then let's get to work." The following week passed like a whirlwind, not with fanfare or flashing headlines, but with hands and hearts. Grace stepped into her role as director of the Veteran Transition and Wellness Center quietly. She didn't bring in consultants, she brought in a coffee pot. She didn't demand changes, she invited names. By the end of the first day, the whiteboard near the entrance read, "Who needs a ride? Who needs to talk?" There were no uniforms. Here, no rank to salute. Just faces, some weathered, some young, all carrying invisible weight. Grace greeted every single one by name. Word spread fast. Soldiers who hadn't stepped foot on base in years came back. Some just to sit, some to breathe. Others with their service dogs curled at their feet, finally welcomed without question. One vet even brought a homemade pie on his 3rd visit. "No reason, just felt like I owed someone something," he said. Tiffany Rios came every Tuesday. Now, she wasn't ready to speak in group sessions yet, but she had begun sketching again. Charcoal portraits of dogs, hands, and homecomings. Grace pinned one to the office wall. It showed a pair of boots and paws side by side beneath a cafe table, and Ray McMillan, he came every Friday. Shadow went straight to the corner he claimed as his own. No one told him to sit. He just knew. And every time Ray arrived, he brought a new vet with him. Sometimes young, sometimes old. Always quiet. He never said much, but he always said this: "Come meet Grace. She listens." Even Lena, the barista Grace had trained, stopped by weekly. She didn't wear the apron anymore, but she brought muffins and laughter. She helped redesign the bulletin. Board N was the first to vote that the break room be called the Moon. When Grace needed help choosing website colors or a name for their weekend storytelling circle, Lena had the final say, but not everyone was supportive. A few officials raised eyebrows. Heading: a military pilot program. Midweek, a team of auditors arrived. Clipboards, suits. Suspicion, they moved through the space asking probing questions, testing filters, counting compliance logs. At the end of their visit, one stern inspector looked Grace in the eye and asked, "What certifications do you have that qualify you to counsel veterans?" She said softly, "Just consistency and kindness." He wrote something on his form without responding. A week later, Colonel Gaines called her into his office. "The program's being reviewed for national expansion," he said. "Model status?" Grace blinked. "Seriously?" He smiled. "You're underestimating the power of coffee and compassion." Still, even with the success, Grace never forgot where it started. One afternoon, she returned to the Mason mug unannounced. She slipped inside just after the lunch rush. Lena was behind the counter. She saw Grace and grinned. "You're supposed to be famous now." "I'm just here for coffee," Grace smiled. The cafe looked different, but in the best ways. New photos lined the walls, veterans from every generation, a small plaque where no one sits alone. Later that day, Grace drove to a small school fundraiser for veterans' families. It was modest: plastic chairs, lemonade, kids with crayon signs. She didn't bring notes, just a heart still full. "Didn't mean to start a movement," she told the crowd. "I just refused to throw out a man and his dog." Silence fell. Then the applause began. Slow, long, real. In the back, Ray stood, silver star pinned to his lapel. He gave her a quiet salute. That night, back at the center, Grace stood alone near the photo wall. She had something to add. She pulled out 2 pictures. One was a printed frame from the viral video the day the Marines came to the cafe. You could see her mid-turn apron still on, Ray at the table, shadow underfoot, and the inspector's clipboard midair. The other was a much older photo, one of Michael, her late husband, sitting outside the cafe. Flannel shirt, boots kicked up, mug in hand. Smiling at the woman behind the camera, she pinned them side by side. Beneath them, she taped a small, handwritten card: "Legacy isn't what we build for ourselves. It's what we protect in others." 3 weeks later, she got a letter. The envelope was thick, official. Gold seal at the corner. Colonel Gaines delivered it himself. "You'll want to sit down," he said. She opened it carefully. Commendation for distinguished service to veterans. Her fingers trembled. "I didn't do anything special." Gaines smiled. "That's exactly why you're getting it." Along with the nomination came an invitation to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference in Washington, D.C., to share her story. "I'm not a public speaker," she whispered. "You are now." Light, one blazer, her old leather-bound notebook, and Michael's watch. At the airport, she heard a familiar voice. "Need a ride, Ms. Donnelly?" She turned. "Base assigned me as your escort," he said with a smirk. Grace laughed. "You clean up pretty good. You're the one about to talk to the Pentagon." The ballroom was larger than she imagined. Round tables, golden chandeliers, cameras everywhere. Her name glowed behind the podium. She stepped up, notebook in hand, voice small at first, but steady. "I'm not a general. I'm not a doctor. I didn't write policy. I ran a cafe. I poured coffee." She paused, but in that space, I watched something sacred happen. Veterans didn't come to be fixed. They came to feel human again. The room leaned in, some eyes welled, heads nodded. People ask me what changed the day I got fired, but the truth is, everything had already changed the moment I chose kindness over policy. Ray stood in the back, unmoving eyes locked with hers. A nod, nothing more. Everything more later that night. Outside the conference center, a man approached. White hair, kind eyes, glasses. "You don't remember me, do you?" She looked at him, puzzled. He held up a photo, old faded Michael, and the older man. Outside, the cafe, I was being medically discharged. I was broken. You poured me a cup of coffee that day and didn't ask a single question. It was the first time I felt like myself again. He pressed the photo into her hands. It's yours now. Back home in Mason, the town threw a celebration. Grace didn't go straight to it. She returned to the center. A few veterans were still. They're quiet, reading, laughing, healing. She walked to the photo wall and added one final image, a picture from the conference her on stage, a room full of standing people. She taped it beside the photo of Michael, then added one final note below them. Both honor grows where kindness is consistent. As she turned to leave, a young man with nervous eyes stepped inside. His voice wavered. Is this the place? For people like us. Grace smiled. No. Son, this is the place for people like all of us. At Hidden Sparks, we tell stories that remind us of the invisible strength among us, the people who don't wear rank but carry something deeper, dignity, decency, and the courage to simply care. If this story moved you, share it. And remember, kindness doesn't require permission, only conviction.